The wind howled through the skeletal trees surrounding Valewood Manor, carrying with it the scent of rain and decay. The estate stood as a ghostly silhouette against the stormy sky, its once grand facade now cracked and weathered by years of neglect. Inside, Lady Elira Veyne sat alone in her dimly lit study, tracing the edges of an ancient map spread across her desk. Her fingers trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion. She had spent another sleepless night poring over fragments of her family's history, searching for answers to questions that haunted her dreams. A sudden crash echoed through the manor, followed by shouts and heavy boots pounding up the marble staircase. Elira froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Before she could react, the door burst open, splintering wood flying in every direction. Standing in the doorway was Prince Kael Crossan, his armor gleaming despite the gloom, his piercing gray eyes scanning the room like a predator stalking prey. Kael stepped inside without invitation, his sword still drawn. His voice cut through the silence like steel on stone. "Lady Elira Veyne, you will cooperate, or this kingdom dies." Elira didn't rise from her seat. Instead, she met his gaze with unwavering resolve, though her frail frame betrayed the toll her years of isolation had taken. "Cooperate? With you?" Her tone dripped with disdain, masking the fear clawing at her insides. "You're no better than the wolves who slaughtered my family." For a moment, Kael hesitated. He hadn't expected defiance, not from someone so broken. But then his jaw tightened, and he strode toward her, stopping just inches away. Towering over her, he leaned down until their faces were nearly level. "Your family is dead because they chose rebellion over loyalty," he growled. "And if you don't help me broker peace with the rebels tied to your name, their blood will be on your hands too." Elira didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her chin upward, meeting his glare with equal ferocity. "If you think I'll bow to threats, you underestimate me, Your Highness." Her voice was steady, though her knuckles whitened where they gripped the edge of the desk. "I owe nothing to a crown stained with betrayal." Kael straightened, his expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of the storm raging outside. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned his attention to the papers scattered across her desk. Without asking permission, he began rifling through them, his movements sharp and methodical. Each document he touched seemed to ignite something dark in his eyes: anger, suspicion, perhaps even fear. "What are these?" he demanded, holding up a brittle parchment covered in faded ink. It bore the sigil of House Veyne, a falcon encircled by thorns, and cryptic notes scrawled in the margins. Elira's breath hitched, but she quickly masked it with a shrug. Old records, nothing of value. Kael's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. "Don't lie to me," he snarled, his face inches from hers again. "These documents mention alliances, conspiracies, names linked to my father's court." His grip tightened painfully. "Speak, or I swear I'll burn this place to the ground." Pain shot through Elira's arm, but she refused to cry out. Instead, she forced herself to meet his gaze, her green eyes blazing with quiet fury. "Burn it, then," she spat. "But know this, if those papers hold secrets, they're ones you won't survive uncovering." Something flickered in Kael's eyes. Uncertainty? Fear? Whatever it was, it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Slowly he released her wrist, leaving behind red marks that would bruise within hours. He straightened, stepping back to examine the documents more closely. As he read, his brow furrowed deeper with each passing second. Finally, he looked up, his expression grim. "You know more than you're letting on," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Who else has seen these?" Elira rose slowly, clutching the edge of the desk for support. Despite her trembling legs, she stood tall, refusing to let him see her weakness. "No one," she replied softly, her voice laced with venom. "But trust me, Your Highness, what I know could destroy you, and when the time comes, I won't hesitate to use it." Before Kael could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them, growing louder with each passing moment. Both turned toward the window, where shadows moved swiftly through the forest beyond. Reinforcements or enemies? Kael's hand went instinctively to the hilt of his sword. When he turned back to Elira, his expression was colder than ever. "This isn't over," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're coming with me." Elira's heart sank, but she kept her composure. As Kael grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever secrets lay hidden in those documents, they were about to change everything for both of them. And as they stepped into the storm, neither noticed the figure watching from the shadows, a cruel smile twisting their lips. As Kael interrogates Elira about the documents during their journey, she reveals that their contents could destroy him, and hints that she knows far more than she lets on. The journey to Blackthorn Keep was a blur of rain-soaked roads and tense silence. Kael rode ahead, his black stallion's hooves pounding against the muddy earth like war drums. Behind him, Elira sat stiffly on a borrowed mare, her hands gripping the reins so tightly her knuckles turned white. She stared straight ahead, refusing to meet the curious glances of Kael's soldiers trailing behind them. Every jolt of the horse sent fresh waves of pain through her bruised wrist, but she bore it without complaint. Weakness, she knew, would only invite further cruelty. As they approached the fortress, a towering monolith of jagged stone that loomed over the surrounding countryside, Elira felt a chill run down her spine. This place was no sanctuary, it was a prison, its walls steeped in blood and secrets. Her gaze flickered to Kael's rigid back, his armor gleaming dully under the overcast sky. He hadn't spoken since leaving Valewood Manor, but the tension radiating from him spoke volumes. They entered the keep through massive iron gates, their hinges groaning ominously as they swung open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and burning torches. Soldiers saluted as Kael dismounted, his movements sharp and efficient. When he turned to help Elira down from her horse, she hesitated before reluctantly accepting his hand. His touch was firm but not unkind, a stark contrast to his earlier brutality, and for a fleeting moment their eyes met. There was something unreadable in his expression, but before either could speak, a commanding voice broke the silence. "Your Highness!" Commander Ryn strode forward, his broad frame clad in polished armor that reflected the dim light of the hall. His stern face softened slightly at the sight of Kael, though his sharp gaze quickly shifted to Elira. "Who is this?" he asked, his tone clipped. Kael released Elira's arm, stepping between her and the commander. "Lady Elira Veyne," he said curtly. "She'll be staying here under my protection." Ryn raised an eyebrow, skepticism written plainly across his features. Protection? From what exactly? He glanced at Elira again, his scrutiny making her skin crawl. "Forgive me, Your Highness, but I fail to see why we should waste resources guarding someone tied to the rebellion." Elira clenched her fists, biting back a retort. She hated being spoken about as if she weren't there, but arguing would only confirm their suspicions. Instead, she focused on keeping her breathing steady, even as memories clawed at the edges of her mind. Kael crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "That's none of your concern, Commander. My orders are final." Ryn didn't press further, though his displeasure was evident. With a curt nod, he signaled for 2 guards to escort Elira to her quarters. As they led her away, she caught one last glimpse of Kael watching her go, his expression unreadable. Later that night, Elira paced the confines of her chamber, her thoughts swirling like storm clouds. The room was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a small table, and a single window overlooking the courtyard below. Moonlight filtered through the glass, casting pale shadows on the stone floor. Despite the relative comfort, every creak of the wooden door made her jump, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. Her pacing halted abruptly as flashes of memory invaded her mind. Images she tried desperately to bury. Fire engulfing her family's ancestral hall. Screams echoing through the corridors. Blood pooling beneath her father's lifeless body as he whispered her name one last time. "No!" she whispered aloud, clutching her head as if to physically push the memories away. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't bring them back. It wouldn't undo what had been done. All she could do now was survive. A soft knock at the door startled her out of her reverie. Before she could respond, it opened, revealing Kael standing in the doorway. He looked different without his armor, less imposing, though no less dangerous. His dark hair was damp from the lingering rain, and his gray eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You shouldn't be here," she said sharply, crossing her arms defensively. "If your commander sees you, he'll have even more questions." Kael ignored her comment, closing the door behind him. "I wanted to make sure you were settled," he said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "And to warn you, don't try anything foolish. You're not a prisoner, but neither are you free to leave." Elira scoffed, turning away to hide the tremor in her hands. "As if I'd trust you after everything you've done." For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind whistling outside. Then Kael stepped closer, his voice low and measured. "You don't have to trust me, but if you want answers, you'll stay alive long enough to find them." His words hit too close to home, stirring emotions she wasn't ready to confront. Without thinking, she spun around to face him, her green eyes blazing. "Answers won't bring my family back, and they won't erase the lies your crown is built on." Kael flinched, just barely, but recovered quickly. "Careful, Lady Elira," he warned, his voice colder now. "Even allies can become enemies." Before she could reply, the distant clanging of bells shattered the quiet. Both froze, exchanging a glance heavy with unease. "What is that?" Elira demanded, her heart racing. Kael didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. "Stay close," he ordered, drawing his sword as shouts erupted in the hallway. As they rushed into the corridor, chaos unfolded around them. Soldiers ran past, weapons drawn, shouting about intruders breaching the keep. Panic surged within Elira, but Kael's grip kept her grounded. They rounded a corner just as a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, a dagger glinting in their hand. Time seemed to slow as the assassin lunged, not at Kael but at Elira. Instinctively, Kael shoved her aside, taking the brunt of the attack on his armored shoulder. Metal clashed as he parried the blade, driving the attacker back with sheer force. Within moments, reinforcements arrived, overwhelming the intruder and dragging them away. Breathing heavily, Kael turned to Elira, who stood frozen against the wall. Blood trickled from a shallow cut on his cheek, but otherwise he appeared unharmed. His eyes locked onto hers, searching for something. Gratitude? Fear? Whatever it was, he didn't find it. "Why were they after you?" he demanded, his voice rough with frustration. Elira swallowed hard, her mind racing. She didn't have an answer, at least not one she was willing to share. All she could manage was a shaky whisper. "I don't know." But deep down she did, and judging by the look in Kael's eyes, he knew it too. As Kael stares at Elira, suspicion warring with lingering protectiveness, another soldier approaches with urgent news. The assassin isn't working alone. Whoever wants Elira dead has infiltrated the very heart of Blackthorn Keep. The aftermath of the assassination attempt left Blackthorn Keep in a state of heightened alert. Torches burned brighter in the halls, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits. Soldiers patrolled every corridor, their boots echoing ominously against the stone floors. Tension hung thick in the air, pressing down on everyone, including Kael and Elira. Kael sat alone in his war room, Maps and documents spread across the heavy oak table before him. His fingers traced lines marking rebel strongholds, but his mind was elsewhere. The assassin's target had been unmistakable. Elira. Why? What did she know, or what did others believe she knew, that made her worth killing for? A sharp knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Without waiting for permission, Commander Ryn entered, his face grim. "Your Highness," he began, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. "We've identified the assassin. He was acting under orders from someone outside the keep." Kael's gaze snapped up, his gray eyes narrowing. "Who?" Ryn hesitated, as though choosing his words carefully. "Lord Darius Veyne." The name hit Kael like a punch to the gut. Darius Veyne, the estranged uncle of Lady Elira, the man rumored to have orchestrated the massacre of House Veyne years ago. A cold knot formed in Kael's stomach as pieces began to fall into place. If Darius was involved, this wasn't just about rebellion, it was personal. Why would Darius send an assassin after her? Kael asked, more to himself than to Ryn. His voice carried an edge of unease he couldn't entirely mask. Ryn crossed his arms, his expression hardening further. "Perhaps because she knows too much, or perhaps because you're keeping her close. Either way, Your Highness, it's clear she's a liability. You should consider removing her from the equation." Kael shot to his feet, slamming his palms onto the table. "She stays," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "If anyone lays a hand on her, they'll answer to me." Ryn raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the vehemence in Kael's tone. "As you wish, Your Highness, but don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned on his heel and left, leaving Kael alone once more. Meanwhile, Elira wandered the dimly lit corridors of the keep, her footsteps silent against the cold stone. She couldn't sleep, not with the memory of the assassin's blade flashing in her mind. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a potential threat. Yet beneath the fear simmering in her veins was a growing sense of determination. She needed answers, and she wouldn't find them cowering in her chambers. Her wanderings eventually led her to the library, a cavernous room lined with towering shelves of dusty tomes. It was here that she overheard voices, Kael's among them, coming from a nearby alcove. Curiosity overriding caution, she pressed herself against the wall, listening intently. "I authorized those orders," Kael was saying, his voice strained. "But I didn't know the full scope of what I was signing off on. Do you think I'd have condoned the slaughter of innocents if I'd known?" Elira froze, her breath catching in her throat. Orders, slaughter, innocents. The words tumbled together in her mind, forming a horrifying picture. Could it be true? Had Kael played a role in the destruction of her family? Her chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. She wanted to burst into the room, to demand an explanation, but something held her back. Not yet. She needed proof. "You were young and eager to prove yourself," another voice replied, a soldier, judging by the deferential tone. "But now the rebels are using it against us. They claim you betrayed your own allies to seize power." Kael let out a bitter laugh. "Politics always finds a way to twist the truth, but we can't afford to dwell on the past. We need to focus on stopping Darius before he tears this kingdom apart." Elira slipped away before anyone noticed her presence, her heart pounding in her ears. Betrayal, lies, blood on hands that claimed protection. Each word replayed in her mind like a cruel melody, chipping away at whatever fragile trust she might have started to feel toward Kael. Later that night, Elira returned to her chamber, her mind racing. She lit a single candle and pulled out a small, hidden compartment in the desk where she kept personal belongings. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, part of the cryptic documents Kael had confiscated from Valewood Manor. She unfolded it now, her trembling fingers tracing the faded ink. It was a coded message, one she'd been unable to decipher until now. But something about the conversation she'd overheard sparked recognition. Slowly, painstakingly, she pieced together fragments of meaning. And then she saw it, a name scrawled in the margins, Darius. Beneath it, a chilling phrase, use her as leverage. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just about revenge or secrets, it was about control. Darius intended to use her as a pawn in his game against Kael. And worse still, Kael had unknowingly walked straight into his trap. Before she could process the implications fully, there was a soft knock at the door. Startled, she stuffed the parchment back into its hiding place and blew out the candle. "Who is it?" she called softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's me," came Kael's reply, muffled through the thick wood. Elira hesitated, her pulse quickening. After everything she'd learned tonight, how could she face him? How could she look into his eyes knowing what he'd done, even if he hadn't understood the consequences? Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Kael stood there, his expression unreadable in the dim light. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he broke the silence. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Elira closed the door behind him, her mind racing. Whatever he had to say, she knew it wouldn't change the truth. And somewhere deep inside, she feared the cost of uncovering it. As Kael begins to explain his suspicions about Darius, Elira notices a faint glow coming from beneath the desk. The candle she thought she'd extinguished has reignited, illuminating the edge of the coded message. Before she can hide it, Kael's sharp eyes catch sight of the parchment. His jaw tightens as he reaches for it, demanding to know what it says. The faint glow of the candle illuminated the cramped chamber, casting long shadows that danced across the stone walls. Kael stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the desk as he stared at the parchment in Elira's trembling grasp. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, each heartbeat stretching into eternity. "What is this?" Kael demanded, his voice low but laced with steel. He reached for the document, but Elira pulled it back sharply, crumpling it against her chest. "Something you don't deserve to see," she shot back, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and fear. Her knuckles whitened around the fragile paper, betraying the storm raging within her. Kael's jaw tightened, his patience wearing thin. "Don't play games with me, Elira. If Darius sent this—" "Oh, so you know about Darius now," she interrupted, her tone cutting like a blade. She took a step back, putting distance between them. "Funny how quick you are to point fingers when yours are already stained." For a moment, Kael looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" Elira let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You authorized orders leading to the massacre of my family. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That your sins would stay buried forever?" The accusation hit Kael like a physical blow. His expression shifted from confusion to shock, then hardened into something darker. "I didn't authorize any massacre," he said through gritted teeth. "I gave tactical commands based on faulty intelligence. I had no idea what they planned to do." Elira scoffed, her voice rising. "And that makes it better? You signed off on their deaths without even looking twice. Tell me, Your Highness, how many other families have you destroyed while chasing power?" Her words struck deep, piercing the armor he'd built around himself over the years. For once, Kael didn't have a retort. Instead, guilt flickered in his gray eyes, a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability before he masked it with anger. "I'm not here to justify myself to you," he snapped, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "But if you think I wanted this, if you think I take pleasure in bloodshed, you're wrong." Elira opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of hurried footsteps outside the door silenced them both. They exchanged a glance, instinctively stepping closer together despite everything. The door burst open moments later, revealing a messenger breathless and pale. "Your Highness," the man gasped, bowing hastily. "Urgent news from the capital." Lady Marjorie Crossan has been implicated in treason. His voice faltered as he delivered the final word, clearly aware of its weight. Kael stiffened, his face draining of color. "My mother!" he whispered, disbelief etched into every line of his face. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the room, leaving Elira standing alone amidst the wreckage of their confrontation. Hours later, Kael sat alone in his study, surrounded by damning evidence laid out before him. Letters, ledgers, and intercepted messages painted a horrifying picture. His own mother had conspired with Lord Darius Veyne to orchestrate the downfall of House Veyne and countless others, in pursuit of consolidating power under their family's rule. His hands trembled as he sifted through the documents, each one chipping away at the foundation of everything he believed about his lineage. How could the woman who raised him, a woman he trusted implicitly, be capable of such betrayal? A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Commander Ryn entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. "Your Highness," he began, closing the door behind him. "We need to discuss, Lady Elira." Kael's head snapped up, irritation flaring beneath his exhaustion. "Not now, Ryn." Ryn ignored him, stepping closer. "With respect, Your Highness, her presence is becoming a liability. Every day she stays here, our enemies grow bolder. If we eliminate her, quietly it would send a message. Show strength." Kael surged to his feet, his fury palpable. "Enough," he growled, his voice dangerously quiet. "If anyone lays a hand on her, they'll answer to me. Is that clear?" The woman smiled faintly. "You were just a child when we last met. My name is Marin. I served your mother before the purge." She turned to the others, her voice firm. "If anyone deserves our loyalty, it's her." Though hesitant, the rebels relented, allowing Kael and Elira to stay. Over the following days, they worked alongside the resistance, learning their strategies and earning their trust. Yet, even amidst this newfound alliance, doubt gnawed at Elira. One evening, as she sat alone by the fire, Kael joined her, his presence grounding yet unsettling. "You've been quiet," he observed, his tone cautious. Elira stared into the flames, her thoughts swirling like embers caught in the wind. "There's more to these documents than I've told you," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Things that could change everything, for better or worse." Kael frowned, sensing the weight of her words. "Then tell me." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "What if knowing pushes you too far? What if it destroys whatever's left between us?" Kael reached out, placing a hand over hers. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." His promise hung in the air, fragile but genuine. Before Elira could respond, shouts erupted from the edge of the camp. Armed figures emerged from the shadows, surrounding them swiftly. "Traitors!" one of them spat, leveling a blade at Kael. "You orchestrated the massacre of House Veyne, and now you dare seek refuge among us?" Elira surged to her feet, stepping protectively in front of Kael. "No, you're wrong." But the rebels weren't listening. With cruel efficiency, they bound their hands and dragged them away, leaving the fire behind as the night grew darker. Bound and helpless, Kael and Elira are brought before the rebel leader, who accuses Kael of orchestrating the massacre of Elira's family. As evidence is presented, documents implicating Kael directly, Elira looks to him, searching for denial. But Kael remains silent, guilt etched across his face. The rebel camp's central tent was dimly lit, the flickering light of oil lamps casting long shadows across the rough-hewn wooden beams. Kael and Elira stood side by side, their hands bound tightly behind their backs. The air was thick with hostility, every face in the room glaring at them like predators circling wounded prey. At the center of it all sat the rebel leader, a wiry man with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. His name was Garrick, and his reputation for ruthlessness preceded him. He leaned forward now, resting his elbows on the table as he studied Kael with undisguised contempt. "You claim innocence," Garrick began, his voice low and dangerous. "Yet we have proof of your crimes." He gestured to one of his lieutenants, who stepped forward holding a stack of documents. Without ceremony, the papers were slapped onto the table between them. Elira's breath caught as she recognized the familiar sigils and handwriting. Cryptic notes scrawled in the margins, detailing orders that led to the massacre of House Veyne. Her gaze darted to Kael, searching for some sign of denial, but his expression remained unreadable. His jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle twitching beneath his skin. "Explain this," Garrick demanded, pointing to a specific passage. "Your signature is right here. Orders authorizing the purge." Kael swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I didn't know what I was signing," he said finally, his voice strained. "My mother. Darius, they manipulated me. I thought I was approving tactical maneuvers, not sanctioning mass murder." The words hung heavy in the air, met with skepticism from the rebels. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some voices calling for immediate justice, while others urged caution. Elira felt her heart sinking, torn between disbelief and anger. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he hadn't knowingly betrayed her family, but doubt clawed at her chest like a living thing. "You expect us to believe you're just another pawn?" Garrick sneered. "A prince playing innocent? How convenient." "It's the truth." Kael snapped, his composure cracking under the weight of accusation. "Ask her." He turned to Elira, desperation flashing in his gray eyes. "You know I wouldn't do this, not knowingly." Elira hesitated, her mind racing. Did she truly know him? Or had she been fooling herself into believing there was goodness buried beneath his crown? Before she could respond, Garrick interrupted, his tone mocking. "Oh, don't look to her for absolution, Your Highness. She's kept secrets, too." He nodded to one of his men, who produced yet another document, a coded message intercepted days ago. This came from Lord Darius himself, a warning about Lady Elira's knowledge. All eyes turned to Elira, who stiffened visibly. "What knowledge?" someone shouted from the crowd. "What aren't you telling us?" Elira's stomach churned, guilt washing over her in waves. She had kept silent for so long, fearing the consequences of revealing everything. Now, faced with the truth laid bare before her, she realized how much damage her secrecy had caused. But even as shame burned in her chest, she couldn't bring herself to speak, not yet. "She's no ally," Garrick declared, rising to his feet. "She's a liability. Both of you are." Before anyone could react, chaos erupted outside the tent. Shouts and screams echoed through the camp, followed by the unmistakable clash of steel on steel. The rebels scrambled to defend their stronghold, leaving only a handful to guard Kael and Elira. Kael seized the opportunity, using his shoulder to knock over a nearby lantern. Flames licked hungrily at the dry canvas walls, spreading quickly. Smoke filled the tent, disorienting their captors. With surprising strength, Kael twisted free of his bonds, grabbing a fallen dagger and cutting Elira loose. "We need to move," he urged, gripping her arm firmly. "Now." Elira hesitated, torn between fleeing and confronting the truth. But when Kael tugged her toward the exit, she followed, her legs moving almost mechanically. They slipped out into the chaos of the camp, dodging flames and panicked rebels as they made their way to the edge of the forest. Behind them, the sound of hoofbeats signaled pursuit. Emerging from the smoke came a group of riders clad in black armor, emblazoned with Darius's crest. At their head rode Commander Rin, his once loyal face now twisted with betrayal. "Rin!" Kael shouted, his voice raw with shock. "What are you doing?" Rin didn't answer. Instead, he drew his sword, leveling it at Kael. "Your reign ends here, traitor. Darius offers me power beyond measure, and I'll take it." As Rin charged, Kael shoved Elira aside, stepping in front of her to block the attack. Metal clashed as Kael parried the blow, his movements fueled by adrenaline and fury. But Rin wasn't alone. His men surrounded them, forcing Kael and Elira deeper into the woods. Hours later, battered and exhausted, they found temporary refuge in a shallow cave hidden among the trees. Rain pelted the earth outside, turning the ground to mud. Inside, the air was damp and suffocating, but it offered a brief reprieve from the relentless storm. Kael sank to the ground, his body trembling with exertion. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his side, reopening the wound Elira had stitched days earlier. She knelt beside him, her hand shaking as she pressed a cloth to the injury. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered finally, her voice breaking. "About the orders, about my family." Kael closed his eyes, guilt etched across his face. "Because I didn't want to admit how blind I'd been, how easily I let them use me." He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "But I swear to you, Elira, I never meant for any of this to happen." Tears streamed down her cheeks, mingling with the rainwater dripping from her hair. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Was I just another piece in your game? Another way to prove your loyalty to the crown?" "No," Kael replied fiercely, reaching out to cup her face despite the pain coursing through him. "You're more than that. You've always been more." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. Then, abruptly, Kael pulled away, his expression darkening. "We can't stay here," he said, struggling to his feet. "Darius won't stop until he has you, and if he frames me for attacking you, the entire kingdom will turn against me." Elira rose with him, determination hardening her features. "Then we fight back, together." Before either could say more, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the cave. Shadows moved at the entrance, silhouetted against the storm outside. Assassins clad in black emerged, blades gleaming in the dim light. "Run!" Kael shouted, shoving Elira toward the rear of the cave. But as they fled, one of the assassins managed to land a strike, a blade slicing cleanly across Elira's arm. She cried out, stumbling as blood blossomed across her sleeve. Kael whirled around, his fury palpable. "Leave her alone!" But the assassins ignored him, focusing solely on Elira. One of them grabbed her, dragging her back toward the entrance. Kael lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground. In the struggle, a crossbow bolt flew past, narrowly missing Elira, but striking Kael instead. He collapsed to his knees, clutching the wound as darkness crept into the edges of his vision. Through the haze, he saw Elira fighting desperately, her green eyes blazing with defiance. "Kael!" she screamed, reaching for him. But before she could reach him, the assassins dragged her away, disappearing into the storm. As Kael collapses, bleeding and helpless, the assassins vanish with Elira, leaving behind only a single taunting note pinned to the cave wall. "The prince falls and the kingdom burns." The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the forest floor slick with mud and the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. Kael woke to the sound of birdsong, though it offered little comfort. His body ached from the previous night's battle, and the wound on his side throbbed mercilessly. But worse than the physical pain was the gnawing emptiness inside him, the knowledge that Elira was gone. He sat up slowly, gritting his teeth against the wave of dizziness that followed. The cave where they'd taken shelter was eerily quiet now, save for the occasional drip of water echoing through the hollow space. The note left behind by Darius's assassins mocked him silently from its place on the wall. "The prince falls and the kingdom burns." Kael clenched his fists, anger surging like wildfire in his veins. He wouldn't let Darius win, not after everything he'd already lost. Pushing himself to his feet, he staggered toward the entrance of the cave, squinting against the pale light of dawn. Outside, the world seemed indifferent to his plight. Trees swaying gently in the breeze, leaves glistening with dew. But beneath the surface calm, danger lurked. Meanwhile, Elira found herself imprisoned once more, but this time there was no pretense of civility. She was locked in a cold, stone cell deep within one of Darius's fortresses, her arm crudely bandaged where the assassin's blade had cut her. The room was barren except for a narrow cot and a single barred window high above her head, offering only a sliver of gray sky. Despite her captivity, Elira refused to succumb to despair. Instead, she focused on survival and strategy, using what little information she'd gleaned from her brief encounters with Darius's men. She pieced together fragments of their plans. It became clear that Darius intended to use her as leverage not just against Kael, but against any remaining allies of House Veyne who might oppose him. Her thoughts turned to Meryn, the elderly woman she'd met at the rebel camp. If anyone could rally survivors of her family's lineage, it was Meryn. Summoning every ounce of courage, Elira began plotting her next move. When a guard finally appeared to deliver food, a stale loaf of bread and a cup of water, Elira seized the opportunity. "Tell Lord Darius I'll cooperate," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But only if he guarantees my safety." The guard sneered, clearly amused by her audacity. "You're in no position to make demands." Elira met his gaze, unflinching. "Then tell him I have information about Kael's weaknesses. Information he'll want to hear." The guard hesitated, then nodded curtly before disappearing down the corridor. Alone again, Elira allowed herself a small smile. Whether Darius believed her or not, she'd bought herself some time, and that was all she needed. Back in the wilderness, Kael moved with singular purpose. His wounds slowed him, but his determination burned brighter than ever. He knew he couldn't face Darius alone. He needed allies. And so he set out for Blackthorn Keep, hoping to reclaim the loyalty of those still willing to stand by him. What he found upon arrival was chaos. Rumors of his betrayal spread like wildfire, fueled by carefully planted lies from Darius's agents. Nobles whispered behind closed doors, questioning his fitness to rule. Soldiers wavered, torn between duty and fear of retribution. Even among his closest advisors, trust had begun to fracture. In the great hall of the keep, Kael addressed what remained of his council. Their faces were wary, eyes darting between him and the empty throne atop the dais. "I didn't authorize the massacre of House Veyne," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "My mother and Darius manipulated me. If you value justice over blind obedience, you'll help me expose the truth." Silence followed his words, broken only by the faint crackle of torchlight. Then, slowly, one man stepped forward, an older knight named Sir Alden, whose loyalty to the crown predated even Kael's birth. "If what you say is true, Your Highness, we owe it to the kingdom to act. But we need proof." Kael nodded grimly. Proof was exactly what he intended to find. As days passed, Kael worked tirelessly to rebuild fractured alliances, while Elira labored in secret to unite the remnants of House Veyne. Through coded messages smuggled out of Darius's fortress, she reached out to Meryn and other trusted allies, urging them to rise against their common enemy. One evening, as Elira rested fitfully on the hard cot in her cell, a vision came to her, a vivid, haunting image that left her breathless. She saw Kael standing atop a crumbling tower, his crown shattered at his feet. Around him, flames consumed the kingdom. Yet amidst the destruction, she stood beside him, hand in hand. A voice echoed in her mind, soft but insistent. To save her, he must lose everything. Elira bolted upright, her heart pounding. Was it a dream or something more? Either way, the message was clear. Kael would be forced to choose between his throne and her life. And if he chose wrong, both would be lost. Moments after the vision fades, the door to Elira's cell bursts open. Standing in the doorway is none other than Commander Ryn, flanked by Darius's guards. His expression is grim but resolute as he steps inside, closing the distance between them. "You shouldn't have tried to play games with Lord Darius," Ryn says, his tone laced with venom. "Now you'll pay the price." Before Elira can respond, Ryn pulls a dagger from his belt and plunges it into her side. Pain explodes through her body as she collapses to the floor, darkness creeping into her vision. Her last thought before unconsciousness claims her is of Kael's face and the weight of the choice he'll soon have to make. The grand hall of Blackthorn Keep was a sea of tension and whispered accusations. Nobles lined the room, their faces masks of disdain or disbelief as Kael stood before them, his posture rigid despite the storm raging within him. The throne loomed behind him like a silent specter, its weight heavier than ever. Kael's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and unyielding. "My mother conspired with Lord Darius to orchestrate the massacre of House Veyne and countless others, all in pursuit of consolidating power under our family's rule." He paused, letting the words sink in, watching as shock rippled across the room. "For years, I was blind to her treachery. No longer." A collective gasp echoed through the hall, followed by an uneasy silence. One noble, a portly man named Lord Harlow, stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "You dare slander your own bloodline? This is madness." "It's the truth," Kael shot back, his gray eyes blazing. "If you value loyalty to my crown over justice for the innocent, then leave now. But if you stand with me, we will expose Darius and restore honor to this kingdom." The room erupted into chaos, voices rising in protest and outrage. Some stormed out, slamming the heavy doors behind them, while others lingered uncertainly, torn between duty and doubt. Among those who remained was Sir Alden, his weathered face grim but resolute. "You're burning bridges, Your Highness," Alden said quietly, stepping closer so only Kael could hear. "Are you prepared for the consequences?" Kael met his gaze without hesitation. "I have no choice." Meanwhile, miles away, Elira moved like a shadow through the corridors of Darius's fortress. Her wound had been hastily stitched by one of Merrin's allies smuggled into the cell, but every step sent fresh waves of pain shooting through her side. Still, she pressed on, driven by desperation and purpose. Her mission was clear: gather intelligence that could turn the tide in Kael's favor. Using a stolen uniform and forged documents provided by Merrin's network, she slipped into restricted areas unnoticed. Each document she uncovered painted a clearer picture of Darius's plans, an impending assault on Blackthorn Keep designed to crush Kael once and for all. As she sifted through papers in a dimly lit study, a noise outside froze her in place. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate, heart pounding. Elira ducked behind a heavy tapestry just as the door creaked open. Commander Ryn entered, flanked by 2 guards. His expression was cold, calculating, as though he already suspected her presence. "Search the room," he ordered curtly. She wouldn't have come this far without reason. Elira held her breath, pressing herself further into the shadows as the guards began rifling through drawers and shelves. Every second felt like an eternity, her pulse roaring in her ears. When one of the guards moved toward the tapestry, she acted on instinct, darting out from her hiding spot and knocking over a nearby lantern. Flames erupted instantly, spreading quickly across the dry wood floor. Panic spread among the guards as smoke filled the air. Seizing the distraction, Elira bolted for the door, clutching the stolen documents close to her chest. She didn't get far before a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back. Ryn's grip was ironclad, his face twisted with fury. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," he growled, pulling her closer. "But it ends here." Before he could tighten his hold, a blade sliced through the air, forcing him to release her. Kael stood in the doorway, his sword drawn and his expression murderous. "Let her go, Rin." Rin sneered, drawing his own weapon. "Still playing the hero, Your Highness? Even after everything you've lost." "I'm not losing her too," Kael replied, his voice low but deadly. Without another word, he lunged forward, engaging Rin in a brutal fight. Steel clashed against steel, sparks flying as they exchanged blows. Despite his injuries, Kael fought with ferocity born of desperation, driving Rin back step by step. Elira watched in stunned silence, torn between awe and terror. When Rin stumbled momentarily, Kael seized the opening, disarming him with a swift strike. The commander fell to his knees, defeated but defiant. "Mark my words," Rin spat, glaring up at Kael. "This isn't over." Kael ignored him, turning instead to Elira. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his tone softening as he took in her pale face and trembling form. She shook her head, though her side throbbed painfully. "I'm fine, but we need to leave now." They fled the fortress together, disappearing into the night as flames consumed the study behind them. For the first time since their journey began, Kael allowed himself to pull her close, his arms wrapping around her protectively. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured against her hair. Elira leaned into him, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Not yet," she whispered. "But Darius won't stop until one of us is dead." Back at Blackthorn Keep, news of the attack reached Kael and Elira just as they arrived. Sir Alden greeted them with grim urgency. "Darius has declared war. He's amassing forces for a final assault on the keep." Kael's jaw tightened, his mind racing. "How long do we have?" "A day, maybe less," Alden replied. "He means to annihilate us and take Lady Elira alive." Elira stepped forward, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Then we fight, together." Kael nodded, resolve hardening in his chest. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, for her, for justice, and for the future of the kingdom. As preparations for the battle begin, a messenger arrives with devastating news. Darius has captured key rebel leaders, including Marin, using them as leverage to force Kael's surrender. Worse still, Darius issues a chilling ultimatum. If Kael doesn't kneel before him by dawn, he'll execute every prisoner, starting with Marin. The war room of Blackthorn Keep was a cacophony of tension and urgency. Maps sprawled across the table, marked with red ink denoting Darius's advancing forces. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting restless shadows that mirrored the unease in Kael's chest. Every second counted, and every decision carried the weight of lives, not just his own, but those of everyone who still dared to stand with him. Elira stood beside him, her green eyes scanning the map intently. Her hands trembled slightly, though she kept them steady on the edge of the table. "We can't let Darius win this," she said, her voice low but resolute. "Not after everything he's done." Kael glanced at her, his expression grim. "And we won't. But exposing his treachery isn't enough if we don't survive long enough to act." She met his gaze, unwavering despite the fear simmering beneath her resolve. "Then we'll take the risk together." Their plan was audacious, a calculated gamble designed to turn the tide. By infiltrating Darius's ranks and broadcasting evidence of his crimes directly to the rebels, they hoped to shatter his control over the kingdom. It was dangerous, reckless even, but it was their only chance. As preparations unfolded, secondary characters faced trials of their own. Sir Alden struggled to maintain order among the remaining loyalists, many of whom were wavering under the threat of Darius's wrath. Some soldiers defected outright, abandoning their posts in favor of self-preservation. Others turned traitorous, feeding information to Darius in exchange for promises of safety. One such betrayal came from an unexpected source: Lady Marjorie Crossan, Kael's mother. Imprisoned within the keep after her crimes were exposed, she managed to smuggle a message to Darius through a bribed guard. The note contained vital details about Kael's defenses, sealing the fate of more than one rebel stronghold. When Kael discovered the breach, his reaction was swift and merciless. He stormed into the dungeons, his sword drawn and his face a mask of fury. His mother sat calmly in her cell, her expression smug despite her captivity. "You never learn, do you?" she taunted, leaning back against the cold stone wall. "Power is survival, and sentiment is weakness." Kael gripped the bars of her cell, his knuckles white. "You've cost us too much already. If Darius wins because of you—" "He'll spare me," she interrupted, her tone dripping with disdain. "Unlike you, I know how to play the game." For a moment, Kael considered ending her life then and there. But instead he turned away, leaving her to rot in silence. There wasn't time for vengeance, not when so much hung in the balance. Later that night, as they prepared to execute their plan, Kael found Elira alone in the courtyard. She stood beneath the stars, her arms wrapped around herself as though trying to hold something together. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. "We should rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be difficult." Elira shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about what happens if we fail." Kael stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We won't." She looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "There's something I haven't told you, something I've been holding back." His brow furrowed, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" Elira hesitated, then reached into the folds of her cloak, pulling out a folded document. "This," she admitted, handing it to him. "It's proof of Darius's involvement in the massacre of House Veyne and my family's downfall. I've had it since Valewood Manor." Kael unfolded the paper, scanning its contents quickly. Betrayal flared in his chest, hot and sharp. "Why didn't you show me sooner? This could have changed everything." "I couldn't," she replied, her voice breaking. "Exposing this would destabilize the entire kingdom. Without Darius, the rebels might turn on each other, or worse, on you. I didn't know who to trust, including myself." Kael stared at her, torn between anger and understanding. Finally, he exhaled slowly, folding the document and tucking it into his armor. "You should have trusted me," he said quietly, "but I understand why you didn't." Elira nodded, relief washing over her features. "Thank you." Before either could say more, shouts erupted from the gatehouse. Guards scrambled to secure the perimeter as torchlight illuminated the shadowy figures approaching the keep. At their head rode Commander Ryn, his black armor gleaming ominously in the moonlight. Beside him sat Darius, his cruel smile visible even from a distance. "Open your gates, Prince Kael." Darius called, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Or watch as your allies die one by one." Kael drew his sword, stepping protectively in front of Elira. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. But before he could issue further commands, chaos erupted. Archers fired from the walls, forcing Darius's men to retreat momentarily. Amidst the confusion, a group of assassins slipped past the defenses, targeting Elira specifically. One lunged at her, blade flashing in the dim light. Kael intercepted the attack, driving his sword into the assassin's chest. But another grabbed Elira from behind, dragging her toward the gate. She fought desperately, clawing at her captor's arm, but the man's grip was unyielding. "Kael!" she screamed, reaching for him as she was pulled away. He surged forward, cutting down anyone in his path. But reinforcements poured in, overwhelming him. As Darius watched from afar, his laughter echoing like a death knell, Elira disappeared into the night. Kael collapses to his knees amidst the bodies of fallen soldiers, his sword slipping from his grasp. The gates of Blackthorn keep closed behind Darius's retreating forces, sealing Elira's fate. All that remains is a single taunting message scrawled on the ground in blood. "Come alone or she dies." The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and silence, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of boots against frostbitten leaves. Kael moved like a ghost through the trees, his armor stripped down to reduce noise, his sword strapped tightly to his back. The weight of his crown felt heavier than ever, not as a symbol of power, but as a chain binding him to impossible choices. Behind him, a small band of loyalists followed in disciplined silence. Sir Alden led the group, his weathered face etched with determination, despite the odds stacked against them. Each man and woman had chosen this path, knowing it might be their last stand. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and racing against time. But none faltered. Kael's mind raced alongside his pounding heart. Every step brought him closer to Elira, and to Darius. Images of her face flashed in his thoughts, fueling both his resolve and his fear. If he failed, he couldn't let himself finish that thought. They reached the edge of the clearing just before dawn, where Darius's fortress loomed like a dark monolith against the pale sky. Torches flickered along its battlements, casting an eerie glow over the surrounding grounds. Guards patrolled tirelessly, unaware of the storm about to break upon them. "We'll create a diversion at the eastern gate," Alden whispered, pointing to a weak point in the perimeter. "It'll draw most of their forces away from the dungeons." Kael nodded curtly. "I'll go in alone. You make sure everyone gets out alive." Alden hesitated, concern flashing across his features. "Your Highness." No arguments. Kael cut him off, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Elira's life depends on this." With that, they split up, disappearing into the darkness. As the first explosion rocked the eastern gate, chaos erupted throughout the fortress. Flames licked hungrily at wooden barricades, sending plumes of smoke spiraling into the air. Shouts and screams echoed through the night as soldiers scrambled to contain the breach. Deep within the dungeons, Elira sat hunched against the cold stone wall, her hands bound behind her back. Despite her captivity, her mind worked furiously, piecing together fragments of information gleaned from eavesdropping on Darius's men. She knew she couldn't rely solely on Kael's rescue. If she wanted to survive, she'd have to fight for herself. Her chance came when a guard entered the cell, carrying a tray of food, or rather, scraps meant to mock her plight. With calculated precision, Elira waited until he turned his back, then lunged forward, slamming her bound fists into the side of his head. The guard stumbled, dropping the tray, giving her enough time to grab the keys dangling from his belt. Working quickly, she unlocked her restraints and retrieved the dagger tucked into the guard's boot. Her movements were silent but deliberate, driven by adrenaline and desperation. Once free, she slipped out of the cell, blending into the shadows as alarms blared in the distance. She navigated the corridors with practiced ease, avoiding patrols and using hidden passageways known only to those who had once served House Veyne. Along the way, she sabotaged supply lines, cutting ropes holding barrels of oil and scattering weapons stored in armories. By the time reinforcements arrived to quell the uprising, confusion reigned supreme. But even as she worked, guilt gnawed at her chest. Sabotage wasn't enough, not without Kael. And so, she pressed onward, searching for any sign of him amidst the chaos. Above ground, Kael fought like a man possessed. His blades sang through the air, striking down enemies with ruthless efficiency. Blood streaked his arms and face, mingling with sweat and ash, but he didn't slow. Every movement was fueled by a singular purpose, reaching Elira. As he neared the keep's central tower, secondary villains converged, throwing new obstacles in his path. Commander Rin appeared first, flanked by a dozen soldiers. His expression was grim, but resolute as he stepped forward, blocking Kael's advance. "You're too late," Rin sneered, drawing his sword. "Darius has already begun." Kael didn't respond. Instead, he charged, meeting Rin's blade with a ferocity born of desperation. Sparks flew as steel clashed, each strike echoing like thunder in the confined space. Though Ryn was skilled, Kael's fury gave him the upper hand. With a final, brutal blow, he disarmed the commander, sending him sprawling to the floor. Before Kael could deliver the killing strike, another voice rang out, a cruel laugh that sent chills down his spine. Lady Margaery Crossan emerged from the shadows, her once regal appearance now marred by madness. In her hands, she held a vial filled with a shimmering liquid. "Ah, my son," she crooned, her tone mocking. "Still playing the hero? How quaint." Kael froze, his gaze locked on the vial. "What is that?" "A gift from Darius," she replied, twirling the container between her fingers. "Poison enough to kill thousands. Enough to destroy everything you hold dear." Realization dawned like a knife twisting in his gut. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, but I would," she countered, stepping closer. "Unless you surrender your throne and kneel before Darius, I'll unleash it upon your precious rebels." Kael clenched his fists, torn between duty and despair. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted nearby. A figure burst through the doorway, breathless and bloodied, but unmistakably alive. "Elira!" Kael shouted, relief flooding his chest. She staggered toward him, her green eyes blazing with defiance. "Don't listen to her," she urged, her voice raw with urgency. "We can stop this together." For a moment, hope flickered in Kael's chest, but then his mother's laughter shattered it. "You think love will save you?" she spat, raising the vial threateningly. "Then let it be your undoing." As Margaery prepares to smash the vial, Darius himself steps into view, his presence commanding attention. With a chilling smile, he reveals the true cost of Elira's survival. Kael must renounce his claim to the throne publicly, or watch as the kingdom burns. "Choose wisely, Prince," Darius taunts, his voice dripping with malice. "Your crown or her life." The great hall of Blackthorn Keep was eerily silent, save for the faint crackle of torchlight and the sound of boots scuffing against stone. Kael stood at the center of the room, his head bowed as though bearing the weight of the world on his shoulders. The assembled loyalists watched him with a mixture of awe and trepidation, their faces etched with uncertainty. Word had spread quickly. Kael's decision to renounce his claim to the throne in exchange for Elira's life and the kingdom's survival. Some whispered that he was foolish, others called him noble, but all were united by one undeniable truth. This man had sacrificed everything, not for power but for justice. Sir Alden stepped forward, breaking the tense silence. "Your Highness," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You don't have to do this alone. We stand with you." Kael raised his head, meeting Alden's gaze with an expression both weary and resolute. "I've already lost too much," he said quietly. "If giving up my crown saves even one life, then it's worth it." A murmur rippled through the crowd, followed by nods of agreement. Loyalty burned brightly in their eyes, reignited by Kael's selflessness. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered amidst the despair. But Kael knew better than to let it linger. Hope was fragile, easily shattered, and Darius would stop at nothing to snuff it out. Meanwhile, Elira worked tirelessly to rally the scattered rebel factions. Her wounds had barely begun to heal, but she refused to rest, driven by a fire that no amount of pain could extinguish. With Meryn by her side, she traveled from camp to camp, delivering impassioned speeches that stirred the hearts of those who had once doubted her strength. In one such gathering, a makeshift encampment hidden deep within the forest, Elira addressed a group of hardened rebels. Her green eyes blazed with conviction as she spoke, her voice carrying over the restless murmurs of the crowd. "Darius doesn't just want power," she declared, her tone fierce. "He wants destruction. He thrives on chaos, on fear. But we are not afraid. We will rise, not for revenge, but for justice, for our families, for the future." Her words ignited a spark among the rebels, who erupted into cheers. Faces once marked by defeat now glimmered with determination. Even Marin, standing quietly beside her, couldn't help but smile. "You're stronger than I ever imagined," Marin admitted later, as they prepared to move on to the next camp. "Your father would be proud." Elira swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. Let's just hope it's enough. Back at Darius's fortress, the villain himself paced before a massive map of the kingdom, his movements deliberate and calculating. Beside him stood Lady Marjorie Crossan, her expression smug despite the madness gleaming in her eyes. Between them lay plans for the final phase of his conquest, a catastrophic event designed to break Kael completely. "It's time," Darius announced, his voice dripping with malice. "Burn Emberford." Marjorie frowned, tilting her head slightly. "The village? Why waste resources on peasants?" "Because Kael cares," Darius replied, his smile cruel. "And when he sees the ashes of innocent lives, he'll realize there's no winning without surrender." As orders were issued and soldiers mobilized, Kael received word of the impending attack via a desperate messenger. The young man stumbled into the keep, breathless and bloodied, clutching a crumpled note. "Emberford is under siege," the messenger gasped, collapsing to his knees. "Darius means to burn it to the ground, to force your hand." Kael's heart plummeted. Emberford wasn't just any village. It was home to hundreds of civilians, including women and children. If Darius carried out his threat, "We can't let this happen," Elira said firmly, appearing at his side. Her presence steadied him, grounding him in the face of overwhelming guilt and rage. "What choice do I have?" Kael asked, his voice hollow. "Every step I take only leads to more destruction." Elira placed a hand on his arm, her touch firm yet gentle. "Then make this one count. Rally your forces. Show Darius that he hasn't won, not yet." For a moment, Kael hesitated, torn between despair and defiance. Then, slowly, resolve hardened in his gray eyes. Turning to Sir Alden, he gave the order they'd been dreading but preparing for. "Sound the call to arms. We march for Emberford." Night fell quickly, cloaking the land in darkness as Darius's forces descended upon Emberford. Flames roared to life, consuming wooden cottages and turning the sky an angry orange. Screams echoed through the air, mingling with the roar of fire and the clash of steel. From a hill overlooking the carnage, Kael and Elira watched in horror as the village burned. Refugees fled in droves, their faces streaked with soot and tears. Among them were children clutching dolls, mothers shielding infants, fathers carrying what little they could salvage. "This is my fault," Kael whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. "If I hadn't resisted—" "No," Elira interrupted sharply, gripping his arm tightly. "This is Darius's doing. Don't you dare take responsibility for his cruelty." Before Kael could respond, a rider galloped toward them, panic written across his face. "Your Highness!" the man shouted, pulling his horse to a halt. "Darius has taken position in the square. He's waiting for you." Kael exchanged a glance with Elira, their unspoken understanding passing between them like a current. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As Kael and Elira descend into the burning village, Darius stands atop a pile of rubble in the central square, flanked by armed guards. In his hand he holds a torch, its flame casting grotesque shadows across his triumphant grin. "Welcome, Prince," Darius taunts, raising the torch high. "Shall we see how far you're willing to go to save these worthless lives?" With a flick of his wrist, he hurls the torch into a nearby building, igniting another wave of flames, and revealing dozens of hostages trapped inside. The air in Emberford was thick with smoke and despair, the acrid scent of burning wood stinging Kael's lungs as he and Elira pushed through the chaos. Flames licked hungrily at the remains of cottages, turning the once thriving village into a hellscape of ash and embers. The cries of the wounded and terrified echoed around them, each sound driving Kael further toward the edge of his breaking point. At the center of it all stood Darius, perched atop a pile of charred rubble like some grotesque king surveying his domain. His torch cast flickering shadows across his cruel smile, while behind him hostages, men, women, children, were herded together, their faces pale with terror. Armed guards flanked him, weapons drawn, ready to strike at his command. "You're too late, Prince," Darius called out, his voice carrying over the din of destruction. "But I'll give you one last chance to save these pitiful souls." He gestured mockingly toward the hostages. "Surrender your crown, kneel before me, and perhaps I'll spare them and her." Kael clenched his fists, fury simmering beneath his skin. Beside him, Elira stepped forward, her green eyes blazing with defiance. "You think fear will break us?" she spat, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You underestimate how much we've already lost." Darius chuckled darkly, stepping down from his perch. "Ah, Lady Elira, still playing the hero? How touching." His gaze shifted back to Kael, cold and calculating. "Time's running out, Your Highness. Choose or watch them burn." For a moment, Kael hesitated, torn between rage and helplessness. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed the circlet from his brow, the symbol of everything he'd fought for, everything he'd sacrificed. Holding it aloft, he met Darius's gaze, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "I renounce my claim to the throne," he declared, his words ringing out like a death knell. "Take it, if it means saving even one life." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Even Darius seemed momentarily taken aback, though his surprise quickly gave way to triumph. "How noble!" he sneered, extending a hand to accept the circlet. "But don't think this ends here." Before Kael could respond, betrayal struck, not from Darius, but from an unexpected source. Lady Marjorie Crossan, who had been lurking in the shadows, lunged forward, grabbing the circlet and shoving Darius aside. Her laughter was manic, unhinged, as she brandished the artifact like a trophy. "The crown is mine!" she shrieked, her eyes wild with madness. "Mine to destroy you both." Chaos erupted. Guards loyal to Darius turned on Marjorie, while others sided with her, creating a deadly crossfire. Amidst the confusion, Kael seized the opportunity, charging toward the hostages. With Elira covering him, they worked together to free the captives, cutting ropes and ushering them toward safety. "Go!" Kael shouted to the fleeing villagers, his sword flashing as he fended off attackers. "Get as far away from here as you can." Elira fought beside him, her movements precise and determined despite her injuries. Together, they carved a path through the carnage, their bond stronger than ever in the face of annihilation. But even as they pressed forward, the cost of their actions became painfully clear. Marjorie, now cornered by Darius's forces, hurled the circlet into the flames, engulfing a nearby building. "If I can't have it, no one will!" she screamed, before being overwhelmed and dragged away. Kael froze, watching as the crown disappeared into the inferno. For a fleeting moment he felt relief. The weight that had burdened him for so long was finally gone, but there was no time to dwell. Darius, enraged by Marjorie's interference, turned his attention back to Kael and Elira. "You think this changes anything?" he roared, drawing his sword. "I'll kill you myself." The final confrontation was brutal and unrelenting. Steel clashed against steel, sparks flying as Kael and Darius exchanged blows. Elira joined the fray, using her agility to distract and disarm Darius's remaining guards. Each strike, each parry, carried the weight of years of pain, betrayal, and vengeance. Finally, with a desperate lunge, Kael drove his blade into Darius's chest, silencing the tyrant forever. As Darius collapsed, his expression twisted with shock and disbelief. Kael stood over him, breathing heavily, his sword slick with blood. "It's over," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. As the dust settled, Kael and Elira found themselves standing amidst the ruins of Emberford, the fire dying down to smoldering embers. Around them, survivors tended to the wounded or searched for loved ones, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion. The kingdom lay in tatters, its future uncertain. But for the first time in what felt like ages, hope flickered faintly on the horizon. Elira turned to Kael, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's finally over." Kael nodded, pulling her into his arms. For a moment, they simply held each other, drawing strength from the knowledge that they had survived together. But as they stood there, surrounded by ashes and ruin, doubt crept in. Could they truly rebuild? Or were their scars too deep to heal? As dawn breaks over the devastated village, Kael and Elira walk hand in hand toward the horizon, leaving behind the wreckage of their past. But as they step into the unknown, a single question hangs heavy between them, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. Can love survive in a world reduced to ashes? The sun rose slowly over the horizon, its golden light spilling across the charred remains of Emberford. What had once been a thriving village now stood as a somber monument to resilience and loss. Survivors moved through the ruins like ghosts, their faces weary but resolute as they began the painstaking process of rebuilding. The air carried the faint scent of ash and wet earth, mingling with the soft murmur of voices discussing plans for the future. Kael and Elira were no longer at the center of the chaos. They had withdrawn to the edge of the village, watching silently as others worked together to clear debris and tend to the wounded. Their hands remained clasped tightly, a quiet testament to the bond that had carried them through fire and ruin. Elira's gaze drifted to the children playing amidst the rubble, their laughter a fragile yet defiant echo of hope. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but blinked them away, unwilling to let sorrow overshadow the moment. "They're strong," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Stronger than we give them credit for." Kael nodded, his expression unreadable. "They'll need to be," he replied quietly, "if this kingdom has any chance of healing." His voice trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Both knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. Yet, even in the face of uncertainty, there was something undeniably powerful about the unity beginning to take root among the survivors. Whispers of Kael and Elira's sacrifices had spread quickly, inspiring acts of courage and compassion that neither could have anticipated. Elsewhere, secondary characters found moments of reflection amid the aftermath. Sir Alden stood atop a hill overlooking the village, his weathered face softened by the morning light. In his hand he clutched a folded letter, an old missive from Kael's father, written during happier times when the crown still symbolized honor rather than corruption. "Your son gave up everything for us," Alden whispered to the wind, as if addressing the late king directly. "I won't let his sacrifice go to waste." Nearby, Marin knelt beside a makeshift shrine dedicated to those who had fallen. Among the offerings lay a small wooden carving, a falcon encircled by thorns, the sigil of House Veyne. Her fingers traced the intricate design, memories flooding back of days spent serving Elira's mother, Lady Seraphina. Seraphina had been a woman of grace and wisdom, beloved by all who knew her. Marin smiled faintly, recalling how Seraphina used to say, "Even in darkness, there is always light, if you know where to look." For the first time since the massacre, Marin allowed herself to believe those words might hold true. Flashbacks wove through the narrative, offering glimpses of House Veyne's legacy before it was shattered. Scenes of grand feasts, filled with laughter and music, contrasted sharply with the desolation of the present. Young Elira ran through sunlit gardens, her laughter ringing out as her father chased after her. Lady Seraphina sat beneath a blossoming tree, teaching her daughter the stories behind each star in the night sky. These fleeting moments served as reminders of what had been lost, and what still lingered in the hearts of those determined to rebuild. Back in the present, Elira paused beside a group of villagers gathered around a partially collapsed well. One man spoke passionately, urging them not to lose faith. "We've survived worse," he said, his voice steady despite the weariness etched into his features. "And if Prince Kael and Lady Elira can stand tall after everything, so can we." Elira exchanged a glance with Kael, who offered a faint smile. Though neither sought recognition, they couldn't deny the impact their actions had on the people around them. It was proof that even in the darkest times, hope could ignite change. As the day wore on, rumors began to circulate, whispers of unrest brewing beyond the borders of Emberford. Word reached Kael and Elira through scouts returning from reconnaissance missions. A new rebellion was rising, led by remnants of Darius's former allies turned dissenters. These factions, disillusioned by his tyranny, now saw an opportunity to reclaim power, or perhaps even justice. "They're calling themselves the Ashborn," one scout reported, kneeling before Kael. "They claim to fight in your name, though they operate independently." Kael frowned, troubled by the implications. "We didn't ask for this," he muttered under his breath. "They shouldn't follow us blindly." Elira placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "It's not about us anymore," she said softly. "It's about what we represent. People need something to believe in." Though her words eased some of his unease, Kael couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The scars of the past ran deep, and the shadow of Darius's influence still loomed large. As twilight fell over the village, Kael and Elira stood side by side, gazing toward the distant mountains where the Ashborn were rumored to gather. The horizon glowed faintly with the light of campfires, hinting at the growing movement. "What happens now?" Elira asked, her voice tinged with both hope and apprehension. Before Kael could respond, a rider approached, bearing urgent news. Darius's loyalists had regrouped under a new leader, one more ruthless and cunning than anyone expected. "The war isn't over," the rider warned grimly. "Not yet." The night was alive with the hum of crickets and the distant murmur of voices carried on the wind. Kael and Elira stood at the edge of Emberford, their silhouettes framed by the flickering glow of torches that illuminated the village's slow rebirth. The air was cool against their skin, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and charred wood, a reminder of all they had endured. For a long moment neither spoke. Words felt inadequate in the face of everything they had lost and everything they had fought to protect. Instead, they simply stood together, shoulders brushing, hands intertwined as if drawing strength from the simple act of connection. Around them, the world seemed suspended in time, neither wholly broken nor fully healed, but somewhere in between. Kael finally broke the silence, his voice low and measured. "Do you think we'll ever see peace again? Real peace, not just the absence of war." Elira tilted her head slightly, considering his question. Her green eyes reflected the soft light of the stars above, their depths filled with both sorrow and quiet determination. "I don't know," she admitted softly, "but I do know this. We've already started something worth fighting for." Her words lingered between them, heavy yet hopeful. Kael nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, where the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold. It wasn't much, just a faint promise of light, but it was enough to remind him that even after the darkest nights, mornings came. Earlier that evening, Kael and Elira had walked among the villagers, listening to stories of resilience and resolve. Some shared memories of loved ones lost. Others spoke of dreams they hoped to rebuild. Each conversation left an indelible mark on them, deepening their understanding of the weight and the potential of what lay ahead. Maren approached them during one such moment, her expression softer than usual. In her hands, she held a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. "This belonged to your mother," she said to Elira, her voice trembling slightly. "She always kept it close, said it was a reminder of brighter days." Elira accepted the bundle with trembling hands, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a delicate silver pendant shaped like a falcon, the sigil of House Veyne. Tears welled in her eyes as she held it up to the fading light, tracing its intricate details with her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Marin placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You carry her spirit within you, child. Don't ever forget that." As Marin walked away, Kael stepped closer, wrapping an arm around Elira's shoulders. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was enough to steady her. Together, they watched the last rays of sunlight dip below the horizon, casting the village in shadow. Later, as the campfires began to die down and the village grew quiet, Kael and Elira retreated to a secluded hill overlooking the ruins. They sat side by side, gazing out at the remnants of Emberford bathed in moonlight. The destruction was undeniable, but so too was the evidence of renewal, tentative, fragile, but present nonetheless. "What happens if we fail?" Elira asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned to face him, her expression vulnerable yet unyielding. "What if everything we've done isn't enough?" Kael reached out, cupping her cheek with his hand. His touch was firm but tender, grounding her in the here and now. "Then we try again," he replied without hesitation. "And again until there's nothing left to fight for, or until we've built something no one can take away." His certainty steadied her, though the uncertainty of their future still loomed large. Yet, even amidst the doubts, there was a glimmer of hope, a fragile thread tying them to the possibility of something better. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Kael and Elira rose to their feet. Hand in hand, they began walking toward the distant mountains, leaving behind the ashes of the past. With each step, they moved further into the unknown, guided only by the faint promise of a new beginning. Behind them, the village stirred to life, its people waking to another day of rebuilding. The Ashbourne continued to gather strength, their banners emblazoned with symbols of unity and defiance. Though challenges undoubtedly awaited, the seeds of change had been planted, and with care, they might grow into something enduring. Kael glanced at Elira, catching the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. "Ready?" he asked, his tone lighter than it had been in weeks. She squeezed his hand, her grip firm despite the tremor in her fingers. "Always." Together, they walked forward, their figures growing smaller against the vast expanse of sky and land. As the sun climbed higher, its golden light bathed the path ahead, symbolizing not just survival, but the courage to dream of a brighter tomorrow. The road stretched endlessly before them, winding through valleys and over hills, disappearing into the horizon like a ribbon of possibility. Hand in hand, Kael and Elira pressed onward, ready to face whatever came next, for themselves, for the kingdom, and for the echoes of hope that refused to fade. And as the first rays of sunlight kissed the earth, it became clear. Even amidst the ashes, a spark remained.